Hey, everybody. Welcome to Redeemer and to Wednesday Reflections. This is going to be a big one, so let's talk about the Book of Common Prayer. Now, I'm going to say what I need to say in the first few minutes, so if you want to watch to that far, go ahead. If you want the full, drawn-out explanation of why this is a big move on the Episcopal Church's part, then stick around for the full length of the video and check it out. General Convention just finished wrapping in Baltimore, and they passed something called AO 59, a resolution that kind of tweaks how the General Convention can make changes not only to the Book of Common Prayer, but also to all the other various collections of liturgy that it uses. And these are just a few examples of the many different books and extra collections that are given by the Episcopal Church. It puts basically all of the liturgy that we have is going to be curated under the website episcopalcommonworship.org, and it kind of silos the worship into three things. So silo one might be the Book of Common Prayer, the official, fully authorized, has the most gravitas collection of worship and liturgy. And then you have the second silo, which are things that we know we like. For example, Lesser Feasts and Fasts, which is the calendar of saints that we recognize in our church year. Like, March 1st is the feast day of David, Bishop of Menivia. July 11th, which was a few days ago, was the feast day of Benedict of Nursia. So as we are adding more saints and honored people into our calendar, new additions and new revisions of this book need to be updated regularly, and those updates could happen electronically on the website I mentioned earlier. And then we have other things we know we like. For example, the Book of Occasional Services. This is a collection of services that we need every once in a while, but we don't need them so much as to need to include them in the Book of Common Prayer. Things like house blessings, a blessing for All Souls Day, a service of public healing, which, by the way, we actually use public healing service pretty often, so I like this one a lot. But this is kind of the things we use, kind of like an extra set of keys that you keep in your drawer. It's not the keys that you're in your pocket all day, but it's that extra set of keys for the shed and for the padlock on the thing over there and all the things you don't have to carry around with you all day. This is sort of that secondary set of keys. All that to say is, and so all that would be within the second silo of liturgy. And then you have in the third liturgy, you would have things that are either experimental or for test purposes. For example, this would have been services for trial use, would have been in the third silo. This is, of course, decades out of date. Enriching our worship, which is a collection of prayers and liturgies that cover many different kinds of groups of things. Not every bishop in every diocese likes enriching our worship. Sometimes it's approved for a use in a diocese. Sometimes it's not. It's at the bishop's discretion. And so those would be sort of silo number 3. All right, so all this to say, what it does is it makes it easier for the General Convention to give the same kind of weight and recognition for something like this, to have something like this. And all of this would be sort of just made more official, and it streamlines our ability to have a fully approved set of prayers that use less gendered language for God. But it would have full authority. Or putting in the liturgies for marriage of same-gender individuals, same-sex marriages. It would put those liturgies right up there with the other liturgies in the Book of Common Prayer without having to go through the lengthy process of revising the whole prayer book. So that is AO 59, and I hope to see it get passed again at its second reading at the next General Convention in 3 years. I'm totally for AO 59 and the direction they're moving in. I think it brings the book-minded Episcopal Church into the 21st century, where we have PDFs and e-readers and computers and cut and paste and things like that. I couldn't be more for it because I still think that our liturgy is not going to run off the rails, and we're not going to have just a random, Wikipedia of liturgies that you just pull from, and everybody's throwing everything into this, website domain. I think it's going to be a nice centralized list of what really is current and usable across the Episcopal Church. So it's a good way for pretty much everything to be made available and current. So that's my video. If you want the background, let's nerd out about the Book of Common Prayer. So the title of this video is, What is a Book? And this was an interesting conversation, our debate or discussion from the floor that happened at General Convention, because people were wanting to know, well, I mean, if we're just making a bunch of liturgies and putting them as PDFs on this website, then we're doing away with the book, and it's important to have the book in the pew, and this is what I grab. Well, at the same time, if a same-sex couple is excited about their upcoming marriage, or thinking about marriage, or thinking if the Episcopal Church is right for them, they're not going to find the marriage ceremony that represents them in this book. And you can't just say, oh, well, from now on, all future printings of the 79 prayer book are going to have that liturgy just stuck in there. We can't change. We can't make those kinds of sweeping changes to the prayer book as the rules stand right now. However, what we can do is we can put out the approved liturgy and it have the same status as the Book of Common Prayer. Now, I mentioned ago, while people are saying, well, what is a book? But we need to have a book, we also need to represent what we believe. And having that episcopalcommonworship.org website does that in a way. And yet I do see the people who want to, say, oh, well, but this is the Book of Common Prayer. And if you're doing episcopalworship.org, that's not the Book of Common Prayer. It needs to be a book. It needs to be a thing that we hold and say, this is the thing. You can't hold a website and say, this is a thing, or print out a PDF and say, this is the thing. It doesn't have the same weight and the same gravitas. Yeah, but honestly, I love a good paperback, but I much prefer an audio book, when I'm driving in the car, when I'm doing whatever. If the fact that I bought a Harry Potter book on CD and listened to it in my car versus buying it on Audible and listening to it on my phone, no, I'd much rather have just the file on my phone and not have to deal with CDs, because who has CD players in their car anymore? I digress. The point is that the physical media, whether it's data on a CD or pages printed with ink in a book, the physical copy is much less important these days. The digital copy is so much more important. For example, every week I make the bulletins for the for church, and I'm always including the little musical staff or the this and that. I'm copying and pasting those from approved sources with copyright and everything all taken care of. But I'm copying and pasting all that from digital sources to put into a digital document that I then print off. So unless you want to be juggling prayer books and hymnals every single time you're in church, and you would rather me not do that nice full text bulletin, we have to be okay with some digital formatting. All right. Also, a lot of the reason that this kind of work is being looked at and approved is, again, the wide use and acceptance and proliferation of like prayers of the people that use non-gendered language for God. It's already out there all over the place. It's just not within the bounds of this book. It's not one of the four or five forms of prayers of the people in here. And yet we have better versions of prayers of the people out there online. And they're approved. They're just not in this book. And changing this book is a tedious process. So let's talk about what it takes to change the Book of Common Prayer. As it stands now, the Article 10 of the Constitution says that, I lost my thing. Give me 1 second. There we go. Constitutions and Canons, page 12. Here we go. The Book of Common Prayer, now established hereafter, amended by the authority of this church, shall be in use in all dioceses in the church. No alteration or addition thereto shall be made unless the same shall be first proposed in one regular meeting of General Convention, and by a resolve thereof be sent within 6 months to the Secretary of the Convention of every diocese, to be made known to the Diocesan Convention at its next meeting, and adopted by General Convention at its next succeeding regular meeting by a majority of all bishops, excluding retired bishops not present, of the whole number of bishops entitled to vote in the House of Bishops, and by a vote by orders in the House of Deputies in accordance with Article 1, Section 5, except that a concurrence by the order shall require affirmative vote in each blah, 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 blah. All right, so what does that mean? Well, basically it means that to change the Book of Prayer, the BCP, you've got to make the suggestion at one General Convention. It's got to get approved. Then you got to let everyone else know about it. Of course, now, these days, you don't have to write a letter to everybody. We all know we have modern media technology. And then you have to have it approved again at the next triennial, so in 3 years later. Consequently, again, this resolution, AO 59, got passed this time at the 80th General Convention, and in 3 years at the 81st General Convention, it's going to have to get passed again by the bishops and the deputies by orders, as I just explained. Okay, moving on. Now, ways you can amend would be a kind of a simple amendment would be amending the table of lessons and all the tables and rubrics relating to the Psalms. And for trial use, authorize for trial use throughout this church an alternative at any time or times to the established Book of Common Prayer or to any section of the office thereof, a proposed revision of the whole book or any portion thereof duly taken by General Convention. And then special forms of worship, provided that none in this article shall be constructed as restricting the authority of the bishops of this church to take such order as may be permitted by the rubrics of the Book of Common Prayer or by the canons of the General Convention for use of special forms of worship. What does that mean? Basically, bishops can sort of make their own rules within their diocese, which is sort of the purpose of a bishop. In a lot of ways, the Episcopal Church is a collection of semi- or self-autonomous states in the diocese, essentially, even though we come together as one Episcopal Church to make federal laws that we agree to abide by. Okay, that was a lot. But, so I mentioned earlier enriching our worship. Enriching our worship has pretty, how would I say? I guess modern language. It has a more comfortable feel in its language, a more casual feel in some of its language. And so some bishops find it very, they don't like it. And they won't approve enriching our worship within their diocese. However, the diocese next door, they're using all volumes of enriching our worship. And so, yeah, it's a pick and choose by the bishop. And so what that last part of Article 10 says is that, again, as long as you're not breaking any rules of the church in general, the bishops can still make up their own rules within their diocese, which is kind of the point of the bishops. If you want to equate it to kind of a states' rights kind of thing, it's kind of a states' rights kind of thing. All right. Now, before we talk about the bear that is revising the Book of Common Prayer, I mentioned about this is the authorized liturgy of the church, and yet things like lesser feasts and fasts and Book of Occasional Services are put out there. They are accepted and they are provided by. But they don't have but in a lot of ways, they're still kind of under that trial use umbrella or experimental umbrella. So let's talk about that. Our Book of Common Prayer goes back to the beginning of the Church of England in 1549, when Thomas Cranmer, my boy, came up with the first edition of the Book of Common Prayer, the first one. He then did a second revision in 1552, and then died a little bit before the next revision came out in a few years after that. And then Church of England in 1662 had the most recent revision of the Book of Common Prayer, and then they kind of stopped. So in England, okay, again, this is England right now, the only authorized book of prayer is the 1662 BCP. But they do have more modern, appendices or collections, which they call common worship. And so you have the Book of Common Worship, which is online and also in hardback, and a lot of churches use them, and there's been different versions of that. And so you look at the common worship in England, it's because under the law, writing or revising the Book of Common Prayer became so cumbersome, they just wrote a different titled book and use it as a supplement that most people use. So they basically, they made revising the Book of Common Prayer so difficult that they don't use it. It became kind of obsolete in a way, although I'm not calling the BCP obsolete. I'm just saying is they painted themselves into a corner. We don't have that problem in America. It's not easy to revise the BCP here in America. In fact, we've done it a few times. Our first American BCP was in 1789. It then got revised again in 1892, and then got revised again in what happened to my camera? And then got revised again in 1828. I'm going to fix my camera. Camera, what's wrong? There we go. All right. So Episcopalians of a certain age are probably familiar with the 28 prayer book. I know people who have requested that be the liturgy used at their funeral. And so we have the 79 prayer book. So how did we get from the 28 prayer book to the 79 prayer book? Well, we did something called services for trial use. authorized alternatives to the prayer book services. And it's basically the beta test for this, where they let priests and bishops get a hold of this thing and start using it and tweaking it and giving feedback. And it was a way for the committee on prayer book revision to get all the kinks ironed out before they sent this off to the press. And what you see here is not exactly the same book that you would have seen printed in 1980, because since this came out and today, the Episcopal Church has started using the Revised Common Lectionary, not the Episcopal Church Lectionary. And so, if you can find older BCPs that have the Episcopal Lectionary still in them, but 20, 30 years ago, we started using the Revised Common Lectionary, and so more modern printings will have that lectionary here in the back, so that if you want to look up the readings for year A, here are the Revised Common Lectionary readings. They're slightly different from what the Episcopal ones used to be. And I like the Revised Common Lectionary. It if you go into a Lutheran or a Methodist or Episcopal or I can't even remember all the churches that still use the Revised Common Lectionary, but it's common. It's all the mainline Protestant churches in the United States and elsewhere use them. So good on you, Revised Common Lectionary. So there are ways that we can put some friendly amendments, if you will, into the future printings of the 79 prayer book without making a whole new 2028 prayer book or something like that. However, AO59 doesn't really change how we can make a whole new revision. A lot of the call for prayer book revision included things like getting the non-binary prayers of the people put in there, getting the services for blessing of same-sex marriages in there. We have liturgies that we know we need and are currently using. They just don't exist between these two bindings. They don't exist in these pages. So people wanted a Book of Common Prayer that reflected that and included all this stuff. But, you got this. You don't need to include this in the Book of Common Prayer, but we still like it and we want to use it. You don't have to include all of these services in the Book of Common Prayer, but we like them and we use it. And yet these are still technically not as important, legally or liturgically speaking, as this. So let's just at least give them all a similar love by putting them all under that authorized setting. And again, having this authorized list of liturgies, assuming AO59 passes its second reading in 3 years, it lets people, or bishops, I should say, do what they want to do without alienating others who think differently. So, for example, the writers of AO59 could, get to put the same-gender marriage liturgy and the non-binary language for God prayers into this same level as the Book of Common Prayer, so you can use it without worrying about what the rubrics are going to say. And it kind of elevates our ideas of marriage without entirely alienating, other bishops who would scoff at that inclusion. But again, it doesn't move us into the Church of England's common worship model. It doesn't move us away from having a printed Book of Common Prayer, and it doesn't mean that a comprehensive prayer book revision can't be done. It's just that we are reaffirming that in addition to a wholesale revision of the BCP, we can also add and alter parts between total revisions. So again, we don't have to wait. We've been waiting a decade, or almost a decade, to put the established same-sex union liturgies in the BCP, but now we have a way to do it without having in between the actual wholesale revision of a BCP. It just makes sense. If you have a company policy that you have on a company's website, in a year, you can just update the company policy on the website and put the little, as revised of, that date. And so it's just a much smoother way of making that happen. We are used to having digital revisions updated regularly, and this is what this is allowing us to do. And frankly, it's cheaper. Do you know how much it costs churches to buy whole new sets of books? A lot. And the trouble of going to print them, and it is such a no-brainer decision. I don't think that the moving to a curated website that has all of our approved liturgies digitally is a problem, because most people are probably going to look it up on their tablet or e-reader or whatever anyway. And then frankly, I trust that the church is going to only put up the approved things. It already knows how to take things and then approve them and then add the other approved things in. But we already know how to make the approved things and to get them approved. This would be just curating all that stuff under one website. And this includes not only just the English versions of things, but the translated or the whole-spun non-English versions of books, prayers, collections, things like that. I couldn't be more excited about this and happy for it. The reason I do these online reflections is because this is where the conversation is. And so for the church to make the bold move of being comfortable with having a book also be an online document, which again, it already is online. You can go to bcponline.org right now, and the full Book of Common Prayer is online. But it just speaks to the reality that we're all working and living and praying in. I mean, as a working priest, I do online stuff all the time. I like having the book with me, but I mean, I'm looking stuff up on my phone more often than not. So that is my long rant about AO 59. If you have extra questions or comments, or if I completely missed the target on something, please let me know in the description or send me an email. All my contact information can be found at redeemerbrookhaven.com. Anyway, that is enough of this. I'm excited about the future, and I love talking about some Book of Common Prayer and some liturgy stuff. So, dear ones, thank you so much, and as always, God bless.